Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending upon where you are in the world today, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for the event, and I welcome you. We have, as always, a great webinar on tap today, but before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be able to access it on demand. Following today's presentation, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our panelists, don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. We'll take a few, hopefully more than a few, near the end of today's presentation. And finally, we are going to be doing a drawing at the end of today's presentation for a series of 5 $50 Amazon gift cards to be drawn for 5 lucky winners. So stay tuned at the end of the webinar, and hopefully we'll get to your name during the drawing. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and get started with today's webinar, which is Top 5 Test Environment Pitfalls Affecting Your Application Delivery. Our speakers today are Jeff Keyes, who is Director of Product Marketing at Plutora, and he is being joined by James Gregory, who is Solutions Architect at Plutora. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Really excited about this topic.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to put myself on mute and let you get right to it then, Jeff.
Excellent. Well, I can't understate how exciting this is for me. I wish I would have met James many years ago. He would be what I consider an expert on environment management, and you're in for a treat for learning from some of his experiences. He comes out of the consulting world and really just has a wealth of experience that I think you're going to get to enjoy. So today, we're going to walk through a bit of what is environment management and answer a question I'm sure everybody's wondering. Well, isn't DevOps already dealing with environments, and why are we talking about this? And then we'll get into the top 5 pitfalls and a little bit of a spotlight about one way to actually solve these problems. So, but James, really excited to have you here. This is going to be cool.
Thanks, Jeff. It's really good to be here.
And just so everybody knows, this is James's first webinar, so that'll make it even more fun, right, James?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Excellent.
Jeff, you're just cruel sometimes, you know that?
I really mean. So what is environment management? James, what do you think of when you think of environment management? What does it look like?
Well, it's always a bit difficult to explain because, ICEB from the testing world kind of sees it as a test manager responsibility. You've got to make sure your environments are fit for purpose to do your testing. And ITIL actually sees it as a kind of a subset of release management. So it's really it's hard to pin down exactly who's responsible for it and what it is, to be honest.
Yeah, well, in fact, I think it's hard to pin down in any organization who's responsible for the environments that are used, but it's such a key aspect of delivery. I know in things that I've seen, there's quite a bit in terms of building up the different environments, because it's not just tilt up a piece of tin and you're good to go. Even if it's a virtualized environment, there's other crap that you've got to get on that box, from the applications and builds. You got test data, you've got to have some kind of infrastructure and harness to actually hook into it. How are you, when you go into an environment that's not really thought about this, what kind of things are you seeing and how they actually request these or find out where they're at?
Well, typically when I think of environment management, I think of kind of the non-production world, because production is quite well looked after by operations teams. Organizations know what they're doing in their production environments, but with their kind of non-production environments, such as, dev, test, training, for example, it's much more flexible. There's a lot of change going in there, a lot of custom configurations that sometimes need to be backed out. So yeah, it's a big melting pot, really. So you're looking at, infrastructure, operating systems, you're looking at different application versions, and then obviously the hooking it all together. And as you've got on this diagram, it can be on-premise infrastructure or cloud infrastructure or even third-party applications as well.
Awesome. And it's kind of funny if you think to yourself, who owns the environments in your organization? I'm sure you're starting to wonder, well, gosh, I didn't even know all the environments I got. I ran into a situation one time where we were trying to do a very significant application test just in terms of making sure the functionality worked, and the application just kept timing out. Lo and behold, another team happened to be doing a very serious load test with massive data and I/O on the very exact same instance that we were using, and it didn't work out so well, to say the least. So, when we think about this, what are the major areas of concerns that you see, James, as you deal with this?
Well, really, the kind of one of the main responsibilities for an environments management team is to do the the booking and scheduling of the environments. This is particularly in case for legacy or third-party environments, because you've got to allocate them to the right people at the right time. Otherwise, you get exactly that same issue that you mentioned of differing teams trying to use the environments and contaminating the environments at the same time. So that's really around the scheduling piece. The arbitration piece goes into well, what happens if we have got contention? If two different projects are trying to use the same environment, who gets it? Do we have to do things like change dates on one of the projects, or send it up the management stacks for someone to make a decision on a priority call? So that's the kind of piece around that. And then we talked about ensuring capacity and availability. The capacity piece particularly kicks in when you've got virtualized infrastructure and you've got part of a virtual CPU and some RAM allocated. What if you run out of resources? What if someone's trying to do some performance testing and their capacity's gone? And in terms of availability, we're really talking around environment uptime. So how reliable is the environment? Is it up enough to actually get your testing done, or does your testing go out because the environment's just not fit for purpose? So that's the kind of scheduling and arbitration piece.
And one of the things I hear all the time is people underestimate how much time is spent just in communicating and coordinating. What's the status of XYZ environment? Is it up? What's the current versions of things that are there? When will it be available? If my schedule slips, what will happen? And just the fact of communicating takes up an enormous amount of time on what gets done.
I totally agree with you. Yeah.
As we look at this, I think one of the areas that makes this particularly difficult is that as you move up in the size of the organization, and your non-production environments are messy. It's not just a simple slice of an application. There's dependencies, and these dependencies make them both difficult, coordinating, difficult in terms of the architecture, in terms of the connectivity between applications, how to make these things all play and work together is hard. And so coordinating these changes is also another problem. Basically, the bigger you go, the more challenging this problem becomes. That does agree with you. Yeah. Does bring me to a big question. Hey, James, we're on DevOps.com. Isn't everybody in the cloud, and isn't environment management really just a non-issue because, well, frankly, everything's already just automated all the way, and I'm good to go, right?
In an ideal world, yes. Unfortunately, a lot of the organizations I've actually been to, that's just not the way things are today. We've got a few items listed here, such as partial test automation. So without test automation, there is no DevOps. Many organizations do have test automation, but it's in kind of pockets. So it's around specific applications or specific lines of business. So yeah, that causes a lot of problems.
Yeah, I hear that too, because I hear, in a typical DevOps journey, the first step is to automate the build and implement CI. The second step is you implement some level of test automation, but it still hasn't gotten to a reliable, the very next problem is your environments are unreliable. And so at any level of this thing, you're kind of in trouble.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And that test automation, it feels like a lot of organizations are trying to do that automation, but it's very spotty coverage, and it's not necessarily that they're automating the right things. It's kind of the low-hanging fruit that's automated.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Then you've got organizations with, they're like the test automation, they're doing bits of cloud adoption. So, they're doing proof of concepts, they've got differing technologies, but they haven't really decided where they're going with cloud. And also they come across issues with, say, licensing costs where, they can't just move it to the cloud because it's not financially suitable. So then they're looking at a re-architecture rather than just a migration of their applications across.
Mm-hmm.
Then deployment automation, exactly the same situation. It's different teams doing their own deployment automation, so using different tools, no real standards, and it's difficult to pin down, who's responsible overall for that, the roadmap to that deployment.
Yeah, particularly tough when your DevOps team has a dependency on a legacy team. Now what do you do?
Yeah, it's and it just doesn't key in with that whole SLAs, OLAs around that piece.
Yep.
Leads us nicely onto the next one, which is dev tool sprawl. So this is really around, everyone feels that another tool's the answer. So they all get in their different development tools. You've got predominantly Jira, but everyone's got different instances of Jira with different projects in there doing different things. And it's kind of trying to, work out how you consolidate into the way forward before then you start doing the integration, etc. So that's a common problem we see, really.
Yeah, exactly. And and I can see the communication gaps and trying to organize this as part of a DevOps strategy of how you're going to move all these things together. That's really, really challenging. So I can't imagine what that's like. Moving forward, let's jump into the pitfalls and what are the basic challenges that as you move forward your strategy in doing environment management, what really are the things you're going to hit, and what are the main challenges that you face that are going to stop your application delivery right in its tracks and really stop progression of your DevOps effort? Maybe you can take this through this. What is this?
Sure. So, and by the way, these are not in any particular order. They're just the 5. So just to keep that in mind. Really, it's kind of, key thing is you must have a visibility of what you're using your environments for. So this is where an environment schedule comes into place. So without that visibility of who's going to be using the environments, when are they going to be using them, you can't really manage your contention. So an environment schedule is like a Gantt-like chart for you of all the environment bookings.
Gotcha. But can I just use the cloud?
Ideally, yes, you could. You could use the cloud. Unfortunately, you have a few issues with that, such as not everything's suitable to go to the cloud. You've got legacy applications, you've got third-party applications you have to deal with. And yes, if it was all in the cloud, you could do, split up environments just in time, use them and bring them down. But you're trying to connect those to existing physical environments. And really, even if you do go completely with the cloud, then you've got problems of just keeping the same problems of sprawl of environments, but just in the cloud. If you're not shutting them down properly and using the correct, flexing of that instance.
Gotcha. So all right. So I've got to have an environment schedule, and I've got to have who's being what, what's being used where, just so I know what's there, including configurations. But so where do I go create one?
So most organizations that I've come across are still using Excel, obviously because most organizations have Microsoft Office. It's effectively free to them, and it's quite configurable. You can pretty much do what you like with it. And it's easy to customize, but there's a few issues with that, and that's really around, it takes a few iterations to get it to show exactly what you need to. It's quite difficult to represent complex environments, because you're trying to do, almost three-dimensional views of what your environments are and what you are actually booking. And then it takes a lot of maintenance overhead. Things are changing all the time, and it's really reflecting that within that Excel schedule. So that's pretty much where you hit some problems.
Gotcha. So these things can kind of get complex. I mean, how complex can they get really?
They can get really complex. So as you showed in an earlier slide, all of those different interactions between the applications. A while ago, I was working for a large retail client who used a lot of SAP, and they had a environment schedule that was used to book that SAP instance, and that was fine. But then they decided that different portfolios within the organization wanted to use that SAP environment. So you then had to map it across all those different portfolios. And then that organization was part of a group. So other organizations within that group wanted to use the SAP environment. By that point, you've got multi-portfolio, multi-organizational plans. And at that point, it was kind of just spiraling out of control. And it was almost a full-time job just trying to keep that plan up to date.
Oh my gosh. I heard one person talking about their environments as being sort of like playing Russian roulette with every test project they did. They didn't know what they're going to run into. Totally get it. So get it. So I need to have some kind of schedule of my environments, just the way it is. I need to know where things are. All right. Pitfall number 2. I don't know what non-production environments exist today, and I don't know what they contain, and I don't know what applications or configuration. So what is this?
So this is a key one, really. I'm a great believer in that you can't actually manage what you don't know. So you'd be amazed at the number of organizations I've gone into, and they've said, we don't really understand what non-production environments we have for our testing. We know we've got them, but some projects know what they are, and some are sitting under desks. It differs really depending on where you go. But you need a source of truth of what your environments are. So because if you don't have that, then how can you work out the impact of any changes or any testing in those?
Gotcha. So what does it mean about, why do I really need this then?
Well, most organizations have a source of truth around their environments. It's typically called their CMDB or CMS. And it should show, these are all my applications, these are all my environments, this is who's using them. But really, those kind of CMDB, CMS applications have been implemented by operations teams, and they're focused on production. They don't really take non-production into account. So really, it's kind of patchy data a lot of the time. So, there is no kind of central source of truth for environments. It's on occasional Confluence pages, it's on spreadsheets, etc. That's really what the difficulty is.
Do you often, have you ever really seen have you ever in your career seen a CMDB that contains a fully populated and up-to-date non-production and listing of environments?
No. Some places are better than others, and a lot of organizations like to think they're good at this, but and even if they do have the data, then people don't keep it up to date. So unless it's being obviously with this kind of information, it needs really to be automated. Otherwise, as soon as it's all manual, then human error creeps in and you have problems there.
All right, so let's assume that, like most people on this call, we've got a bunch of physical environments. We have, there may be virtualized and so forth, but I don't have anything that's populated to the CMDB. I don't have any sort of listing. Where do I go? How do I go get this figured out?
Well, a lot of people ask this, and the best first step I would say would be, go with what you know. So, if you have a high-profile project or program that's using environments today, then it's relatively easy to go around to the project, ask them what they're using, get that details, and effectively start building out that source of information. And then as you continue to move around the organization and learn more about more environments, then you can build that up and make it more mature. Other good sources of data are infrastructure discovery tools, because that knows pretty much all the servers that are out there and what operating systems are running on them. So you can pull in from there. You can go and speak to your systems administrations or DBA teams, because they patch this stuff. They must have lists of what this is in there. So it's kind of just pulling from all these disparate sources and getting it into a central location that's kept up to date, and then that becomes your best source of the truth moving forwards.
Gotcha. And then put that into your list. Have you ever, I mean, what kind of experiences have you had from people that have suffered from this?
Quite varied. I've been into organizations, as I said, that have no visibility of their non-production environments. And what we kind of said is, there was one financial services client that said, we only know 30% of our non-production estate.
Wow.
So we yeah, and that's not uncommon. So what we did was we plugged into their infrastructure discovery tool and got this is how many servers you have in non-production, and it was all sitting on VMware, so they had that source of truth. So we were able to compare what was in VMware with what was in the infrastructure discovery tool, and then that gave us, well, this is the whole 100% of what exists, and then we could effectively chip away at that and work out engaging different teams to learn more. But at least we knew what the target was. So that was probably one example of where I've seen that before.
Cool. Let's go on to the next pitfall. So, okay, so I got a schedule, I've got a list, but frankly, the biggest pitfall, and I've heard this a number of times too, is, hey, I've got all these non-production environments. They're not in sync with what's supposed to be there. I've got wrong builds there, and I'm completely invalidating my testing. What can you talk about what this is?
So you hear it time and time again. It's I did some testing. It might be some systems integration testing, and it passed all of my tests. It was great. Then we moved it into UAT for the users to get at it, and all these defects occurred. What changed? And it was really the baseline. It wasn't at a production baseline. So when they did their application and configuration changes to the environment, it wasn't comparing apples and apples. It was comparing apples and pears, really, and that's kind of where this issue comes from.
Gotcha. So what do I do about this, and why do I need this?
So this is really around configuration management. This is managing the configuration of your varying environments. And when we say configuration, we're talking around, things such as, what resources are on the box, CPU, RAM, etc., up to what operating system and versions of that, and then moving up to, what version of Java have I got in place, and then what version of the application and data, which all comes in. So they're all your kind of configuration items, and it's just making sure that you keep all your environments in step, and then the only changes to them are the new code and config as you deploy those.
Gotcha. So what if I don't, have a configuration management solution? What if I'm not as code?
Yeah, you're right, because ideally, everything would be DevOps and it'd all be automated deployments, and you just effectively cookie cutter that same deployment, and it'd all be in sync. But as I mentioned, not all deployments are automated. There are manual steps, and people forget things. They make mistakes. So what I'd advise is, pulling those areas of configuration information. Customers are using Confluence pages. Other teams within customers are using SharePoint sites. They are maintaining configuration, but it's not in one place, and it's not visible or even known to everyone. So it's really kind of like the CMDB, putting it into a central location and making sure everyone knows that's the best source of truth, and that's what you need to update. So if you can't automate, then build your business processes around it so that people do update it following successful deployments, configuration changes, etc. Or even if they go in and allocate some more CPU or RAM to a server.
Gotcha. So what experiences have you had in dealing with customers in this problem?
So yeah, I was a large retail customer, and my alarm bell started going off when they said, Oh yes, we're not very sure about our pre-production environment. So this is their kind of staging environment, which is their last step environment before they go live with code. And they said, well, the issue we've got with this is we don't really trust it. And I said, okay, why don't you trust your environment? And then they said, well, the environment's so busy, they never give us any time to actually refresh it from production. So it's not in line with production at all. So there's no real point in us using it. And they were doing performance testing in here, and and they're staging, and it's like, yes, you're probably right. There's probably not much point in using this environment. So we said to them, you need to build in some maintenance windows so the guys can get in there, keep it up to date with production, and make sure it's fit for purpose. Otherwise, you're going to invalidate your testing.
Yep. I'll never forget my first pipeline full of automated testing that we pushed to an integration server, because man, it worked great on the build machine, had everything set, and man, did it blow up. It's not that it blew up every single time, it's that we would run that thing every night and it would run through all this stuff, and there were so many different things that were configuration problems. And I think the thing that drove me nuts is, me as a developer, it's like, okay, the testers looked at it, saw there's some problems. Okay, guess who got the issue? Me. Now I'm going and debugging environment problems when all I wanted to do was write code at the time. Craziness. Great pitfall.
Yeah.
So pitfall number 4, I don't understand how my non-production environments hang together. And frankly, everybody's looking to me to come up with the answers. Tell me about what this is.
So this is really around environment diagrams. So this is a common pain that you go into a client and they don't actually have pictures of their environments, sometimes not even full pictures of what their production environments look like, let alone the additional complexity of their non-production environment. So, it's like you can't see what applications are missing out of certain environments. You can't see how it hangs together. So, and no one seems to have, all the pieces of the puzzle. You have to go around and speak to developers, architects, etc., before you understand how it works. And I've always felt that, a picture tells 1,000 words. And that's really what this one is about. It's having a picture of what your environments are.
So I'm going to guess that not many people have these. So what happens if I don't have one? Where do I go at that point?
Well, typically as an environment manager, you end up having to be the one to draw them, one way or another. So
that's just horrible. That does not sound like fun.
No, brush off your Visio skills and get to it, really. These, what you can do is you can go back. There must have been, designs driven for the solutions. People must understand what it looks like. So it's that painstaking work of going around, grabbing some pictures, even if they're out of date. That's still fine, because you can put them in front of people and say, look, this is our best understanding of what the environment is. And they said, oh no, this is out of date. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. You correct it, go back in front of them, and it just improves all the time. So that's what I'd recommend doing around that piece. Just unfortunately, walking the floor and just communicating with people until you get a common consensus on what the environments look like, and then maintaining them.
Well, maintaining it's really hard. What kind of key things are interesting to draw on that diagram? What do I need to make sure I include in it?
So different organizations keep different things, and there's no one size fits all, but it's really details around. You can put details around what servers make up the environments, what protocols the different applications talk to each other by, what the messaging is and how that works. So anything that pictorially describes the non-production environment and how it works, that's the kind of information you should put on there. Obviously, it's useful as well if you've got maybe a performance test environment, if you could show the load balancing and things like that, just to help the test team and other users understand what's included and how it all hangs together.
Gotcha. What kind of experiences have you had around, not having this or having it?
So I went into a large retail client, and what they had was a non-production environment that had been totally ignored for 6 months and, neglected. People had stolen bits from it to fix other things. And we had to try and get this up to speed and fit for purpose. So
Frankenstein is what you're saying.
Pretty much. But what they did do is they had a really, really good picture of the environment, of what it should look like. So, and what they used to do, they had this up on a wall in an office, absolutely full size, and then they had it laminated. And everyone would go in there and trace the message paths for core business processes, like adding a new user, doing a transaction, etc. And they could say, this is the journey that transaction goes down through using this picture. So what we had to do was test every single one of those connections in order to make sure that environment was hanging together and that the data flowed correctly. So that was a painful yet really rewarding engagement that I did.
Very cool.
Also, and also we got to go to the solution architects and tell them that they'd got things wrong that we'd found on their diagrams as well. So
that always feels good.
yeah.
Excellent. So for when I look at an environment team, I suppose one of the pitfalls that I'm going to think about of managing environments is I don't really know what size of team I'm going to need. If I'm going to put this together and I have environments all over the place, I'm going to put people to in charge of dealing with these things, whose responsibility. How do I know what size of team and to support this?
So this is a common question we get asked all the time. So kind of things we look at are, we need to understand what the scope of work is. We've talked about environment management and how it's kind of a moving goalposts. So really you need to nail down what is your environment management team going to be doing, and then actually get that documented, preferably in some kind of a strategy document, which I'd recommend. And then, what you need to work out is what you're doing is what organization are you supporting? So are you supporting a large enterprise organization that has multiple lines of business or towers? So if so, then it would probably make sense to start off as an idea to actually allocate an environment manager per tower, because then they could build up some knowledge in that area as from the business, as well as understanding the environments that fit under that line of business. So that's pretty much how I initially start to target it, so typically a line of business, they use the same environment, so therefore there's good crossover.
Gotcha. And how talk about the business case that would need to be produced for how you get this done.
Yeah, so if this is a greenfield site and they don't have an environment management capability, then obviously you've got to bring in these resources and therefore you've got to put a cost to it. So it's quite difficult because obviously to start with, you just don't have those baseline metrics. So if you're replacing an existing team, then you've got lists of the number of service requests that they've actioned. You've seen the number of environment defects or incidents that they've dealt with. So you can kind of do some number crunching and kind of see how much work there actually is. But if it's new, then it's kind of a little bit trial and error. So what I'd recommend is, start small and then build up. So if you are going into a new area, maybe reduce it to a single line of business to start with minimal service offerings, such as maybe just booking and scheduling, and then either expand that smaller service offering out to other lines of business with the lessons that you've learned from doing that, or expand the service offerings within that single line of business. So you can approach it a couple of ways depending on what the need is, because obviously the first thing is, get people in there, understand the environments, get it all working smoothly, learn those lessons, and then roll out that successful model. So that's kind of how I would do it.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's say I've got my model, or I'm already have an environment management team. I get my numbers wrong. What happens, and what do I do about it?
Right. So if you get your numbers wrong, if you've underestimated, then you end up with like burnt out resources. If you overestimate, then you've got team members sitting on their hands. And if you've got overworked resources, then you're not servicing the customer properly. So they've got poor customer satisfaction and they've got a poor perception of your new service as well. So you kind of hit a stumbling block before you've even really got started.
Gotcha. And if the scope creeps?
I think you should do an impact analysis of that scope creep, because obviously you want to do as much as possible as long as it's the right thing to do. So just look at what you're being asked to do. Look at, have your team got the spare capacity to do that, and do they have the right skills? I've seen environment managers be asked to do deployment management roles, and also become the release manager for a particular area as well. They're not necessarily skilled in that area, and just throwing bodies at it won't get the job done. So that's just a couple of things to think about.
Got it. What kind of examples have you seen of this?
So a large financial client I was working at, they just rolled out a centralized environment management function, which was good, but there was some gaps in the release and deployment management spaces in the organization. So they were just getting started with a centralized release management function. So not every project and program had their own release manager. And also there was the deployment management was a bit sketchy as well. So there was some automation, but there was also a lot of manual activities as well. So one of the environment managers was asked to effectively do that deployment management and release management role on top of her existing environment management role, which kind of took her away from the day job, and also meant that the service wasn't standardized. And you couldn't, if that person was off sick or on holiday, you couldn't backfill them, because they had a lot of specific knowledge around that line of business and those skills they'd had to develop. So it just wasn't sustainable. So if you are going to take on additional workload, think of the repercussions and decide, do I need more people? Do I need to upskill my people? Or am I just putting a Band-Aid over a failing in another area of the organization that I shouldn't be meddling with?
Yeah, and frankly, if you're ever going to get to the point of automating all of this, you've got to get to the point where you have a bit of spare capacity so that you can. Because without that, you'll never have an opportunity. You'll be so busy just band-aiding and fighting the fires that you can't get there. And to get this stuff in an automated fashion that's repeatable is ultimately the goal of where to go. And I think that's where it is. But so
yeah, that's quite correct.
Well, let me tell you a bit about Plutora, because we obviously at Plutora we have a solution that addresses this, that helps you along this journey of implementing and planning and managing environments. And what it does is basically group together and track all the different things we just talked about. There's a built-in listing of different environments and different ways you can slice and dice them. It includes their configurations and technical specs. It includes a calendar as well as assignments. But where it gets cool is that tracking is much deeper and richer than what you can get in simple spreadsheets, and you can do integrations to other automated tools that do the discovery and can bring the data in and out. That's enormous value, because now you always have an up-to-date schedule, you always have an up-to-date calendar, you have complete listing of the details of the specifications and what's there. You can incorporate more by integrating approvals and audits and tracking that whole thing. Where this story gets really interesting, though, is the communications that are just automatically handled for people that are requesting us. You could be in Jira and request an environment, and that then comes as an environment request for a particular date and time. There's a catalog that's worked from, and then the environment management team can go fill that out. Why do that? That all sounds really manual. Well, the point is you're here right now because not all your environments are completely automated. So how are you going to get there? And the point is, this is your path. And you've got to free up enough time to where you, as someone who cares about environments, can do that. Your next step is to begin on that path of automation. And as you do so, you can use Plutora to integrate into those tools to do the provisioning. So now when an environment gets provisioning request or a request for a change on a particular environment, you can have that all as code and just call into it as part of the process. If it's cloud-based, you can also use it to spin up and shut down and make sure these things are shut down and have some level of governance so that your environments aren't just the Wild West of what's there. The value here is now you can start to see the requests that are coming through, what's being utilized, add some governance to it, evaluate your impacts between who's using what, decide which pipelines can share environments, and even get to the point where you can manage chargebacks to the different teams to justify and manage the utilization. You know, it was fun. If you haven't seen the other webinar we've done on environment management, we've done a few. We did a study with EMA where they did a survey and said, you know, who's out there? Who's doing environment management? Interesting enough, Plutora came out as the dominant leader. There's other folks out there, but we've got a great story as we move this forward. You know, there's a lot of benefits in using an environment management solution. They really end up in you'll get a return on investment for a solution like this in just a matter of a few months. But when you have resilient environments, the most valuable thing you will find in all the studies is that you'll return time back to your dev test teams because they won't have to screw with this area. No longer will devs be called in because a build failed or a deployment failed or something else happened that was environment related, and that saves time. The study that we did with EMA showed that rough time was on the order of a couple of weeks per release. And that's massive when you think about the number of releases that you're doing. So a lot of cool things that are there. I want to address the pitfalls. And James, I want to show, for example, having a schedule. Do you want to talk just a bit about the environment scheduling in Plutora and how that helps?
Sure. So with the environment scheduling, what you get is no longer do you need to actually maintain the spreadsheets because as you change your bookings within the tool, it actually moves them on the schedule. So you always have a moment in time view that's real time view of those environment bookings. So that's invaluable. Other things you get with the environment schedule functionality is contention. So the tool actually identifies when you've got contention at the end-to-end environment or application instance level. So you could say, I've got an SIT environment, for example, and I've got contention in there, or I've just got contention in application A in my SIT environment. It kind of handles all of that. And then you can actually pivot the views depending on what you want to see there.
Cool. What about the technical specs problem and knowing what the configurations were? Well, that's the next problem where in Plutora there's this whole sweep. Some of our customers actually use this as a frankly their own non-production CMDB, because why would you need a CMDB for production for operations? And in the test world, you've got it all here, as well as you have a lot richer information than you typically find in a CMDB because you've got applications, you've got a lot of other pieces of this. James, how big of a deal is having the stakeholder portion of this, and what has that meant?
So the technical specs and the configuration is invaluable. So we have some customers that pull this detail from their CMDB if they have one. They also can pull this from infrastructure discovery tools and effectively populate this. So you're not replacing what those tools are doing. You're just kind of bringing it up from disparate sources such as spreadsheets, conference pages, etc., and having a single view of what the configuration of that application instance is like. And this stuff's invaluable. We've had customers that say, I want to see how much of my my C drive is free. I want to see what patching versions I'm on in each of my environments. And this gives you the ability to store and then report on all of that information. And also to compare between different environments as well.
Perfect. How did the notifications work off of this? And what is this RACI thing?
So around the RACIs, we maintain races throughout the tool. So this is your typical responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So this allows you to, at the application as well as the application instance and environment level, actually keep track of, okay, who are the interested parties? Who's using the environment? Who owns the environment? Who should just be informed if I make changes to the environment? And what this means is you don't have to maintain these big email distribution lists of, oh, who should I tell that there's a problem with my environment or that I'm doing a deployment? The tool knows that and actually sends out automatic notifications if there's going to be a change to a booking, or if there's going to be a change request that's going to impact what they're doing at the time. So no longer do you have the issue where you're halfway through testing, someone deploys a patch, and then you've got to start all over again and you're delayed by a couple of weeks. So it's invaluable, really.
Cool. What about seeing how things are related? Tell me what would I use an impact matrix for, and how does this help me?
So Plutora's got a couple of different impact matrix, whether you're looking at environments or releases. And what this really does is gives you a great visibility, because Plutora is modeled on an organization. You can show different lines of business or teams within an organization. It can show the relationship between whichever area of the business is doing what releases, and what environments those releases are doing, and what changes are in those releases. So it's kind of overlaying all that information to you, so you can then start doing some really cool reporting around, which areas of the business are doing the most change and stuff like that.
Gotcha. The thing that would have been helpful for me is to also know, hey, I'm about to change this particular application. I wonder who else I'm going to screw up on which environments, what that means, or if an environment goes out, what's going to happen. So you talked about an environment map. Tell me about the grouping and what I use this for.
So what Plutora can do is, we talked about, modeling applications and application instances, etc. So Plutora can actually produce an automated graphical representation of your environments. So this is not a manual overhead. This is something that comes out of the data that you maintain within the tool. And it'll actually show what application instances are talking to other application instances. And also, it'll even go down to the level of what protocol they're communicating by, and whether it's a single directional, bi-directional communication. So it's really useful. And also on this view as well, you're pulling back that vital configuration information when you click on any of those application instances. Other good features in here, it shows second degree relationships. So if you've got, say, a central gateway that all your environments are hanging off of, it will show you that relationship as well. So if you're going to take that gateway down, you're effectively going to lose all of your environments. It's really good for your impact analysis.
That could be a slight problem if all your environments go down. Okay. What about managing the requests, the tickets, if you will, that come in?
Sure. So environment booking's always been a bit haphazard. It's been send someone an email, walk by their desk, give them a call. And what this really does is it puts structure around that and actually creates a ticket for each environment booking request, and then gives a full audit history. So what was asked for, when it was needed, and who is asked for by. And then Plutora also maintains a full audit history. So if that request changes, you keep track of all those changes, so you can actually see the life cycle of that request. And if that needs to be extended, say the booking needs to go out by a couple of weeks, we can actually take that in as well, and then do an impact analysis of what extending that booking request really does to people that are using the environments afterwards. And as Jeff mentioned, that RACI means that the people who had the next environment booking are notified that someone's trying to steal some of their environment time. So that's kind of the environment booking piece. And then we have the concept of change requests in non-production. So this is, can I do something to your production, to your environment, please, such as do a deployment, apply a patch. So this really gives the ability to keep a full audit trail of everything that's done to the environments, to maintain your configurations and the management of those configurations, as well as notifications of any upcoming work that might impact your environment booking.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's really, if you're on this journey, the part of the reason I'm really excited about this webinar is just because you ought to know. Well, how do I put this? So I was just talking to Gartner yesterday, and the conversation, we were talking about environments, and his response was, "Look, 1/4 of the people I talk to have no automation, no test automation, no environment configuration, don't really know what they're doing for their non-production environments." 1/4 from a pretty well-known analyst. I'm surprised at that. I would think, gosh, we've got to be further along than that, and we're not. Your very first and easiest step that you can make is diving into environment management, and this is simple. It'll ROI quickly, and it's not that difficult of a tool to implement. I wanted to make sure too that we ended up with a lot of extra time, because you've got on the line James is, in terms of environment management, an expert. So by all means, this is a great time for Ask Me Anything, but we'll take the questions as they come in.
Yeah, well, don't ask him anything, but at least it's
True.
That's pretty much opening Pandora's box right there. But yes, if you do have a question for James or Jeff, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. We have gotten a few questions in so far, so I'm going to go ahead and just dive right on in. First of all is, let's see, the subject of environment allocation. The question is, will you be discussing environment allocation? Knowing what the capabilities of each environment is and managing its allocation is a very difficult task to manage manually. So do you have any words of wisdom regarding environment allocation?
Yeah, so as we've kind of mentioned previously, you need to understand your environments as a starting point. You must know what environments you have, and then you need to understand them. So it's kind of that visualization of your environments. Other things we do within the tool are, you can keep track of what phases of testing, for example, that a particular environment's used for. So you run a smaller environment for, say, your functional testing, and then a much larger environment for your, say, performance or load testing. So it's really understanding what infrastructure underpins your environments, understanding the operating systems on there, and then you need the business knowledge around the applications. Do you think that's fair, Jeff?
Yeah, well, and I love this question because how do I know about the capabilities of the environment and how to manage the environment? And yeah, that's the point. The whole point of go get a tool to help you with this. Stop trying to do this manually. It sucks manually, and there's no reason for it. There's no reason to be experiencing this pain. Implement a tool and then devote your time on the automation and maturing of the process of discovery, of configuration, provisioning, mature your stack that you enable, mature the data that you do and make that more repeatable. Even if you go to a Kubernetes cluster, you're still going to end up in some level of environment management. It doesn't matter. You have to be able to deal with environments in terms of their usage. And as soon as you're going to think about an environment that is, a user acceptance test or integration test where you have multiple pipelines converging, this is a problem you have to deal with.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Next question. What do you recommend dealing with third-party vendor managing your different environments whom they constantly run patching and upgrades? A loaded question there.
Wow. That well, before I let the expert speak, you exactly nailed it. This is the Russian roulette problem. This is why that impact matrix is so critical. I'm me, the marketing guy. Hey, we have customers that we have one customer that has so many different vendors in there that one of the vendors took over the environment management and just said, hey, we're going to coordinate the request for which environment's doing what and make sure that we coordinate the downtime. And that's why that one vendor is in there. The whole point is, without visibility, you don't even have a shot at dealing with this. Go ahead, James. No. Now that I got on my rant, I'll get off.
Get off that soapbox already.
Yeah. We see this time and time again. It's like third-party environments, and you never get enough of them. So you're always having to repoint them to different environments to actually do your testing. They have different support contracts in place. So so who do you need to reach out for support? Who's the account manager that's going to tell you how much it's going to cost you for that third-party environment? How do you get more of them? So within Plutora, you can actually maintain all of that environment information. You can actually say, this is the vendor, these are your support hours that you're getting from that third party. This is the account manager if you want some additional credits on there or you need a new instance. And these are the times it's available. So it's really finding somewhere you can actually maintain all that core information against a specific application that you know to be third party.
I actually have a video. Email me after you can get our email information, but I'll send you a video of a customer of ours that actually is dealing with this problem. I will say, if you have third parties managing non-production environments, please contact us. You don't have to experience this pain anymore. There's an easy solution. It goes away quickly.
All right, great. So we're about 4 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we can slide in one more quick question before we have to close it out and do our drawing for our 5 gift card winners. Okay, so question is, what kind of monitoring should I use for my non-production environments?
Well, with this one, unfortunately, the answer is it depends. So
fair enough.
Lots of large organizations have come across, have got multiple monitoring tools in place, predominantly aimed at their production infrastructure and applications, making sure it all works as it should. The issue is, which one of those do you pull into your non-production environments and monitor those? Because those guys aren't always happy for you to use their tool or even change the configuration of it to look after non-production environments. And also, frankly, you don't need the same level of monitoring in non-production that you do within production. So, pick a good candidate, preferably a cheaper one, and point that in your non-production space. And also, you don't really need the application performance monitoring side of it. You just need for starters, are my environments up? Are the applications up within those environments? And, is data flowing through them? So kind of get that in place. And a lot of organizations have manual health checks that they run daily, predominantly offshore. So it's kind of think about automating that and make it repeatable and use it for different things. So don't just using it for environment monitoring, use it as a post-provisioning check. So if someone builds you a new environment, yes, the environment's fine against the production baseline, or use it as a post-deployment check to say, I've deployed some new code and new configuration, it's still fine against my production baseline. That's good. And then you can actually use it as a health check as well that can be run daily, but you're not using a person to do it.
Excellent. All right, guys, that's about all the time that we have for the Q&A section. I do want to thank everybody who did submit a question. If we didn't get to your question, I'm sorry, we ran out of time, but just know that the folks at Plutora will be getting a copy of all the questions and they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline. Before we close things out, I do want to do the drawing for the 5 $50 Amazon gift cards. So drum roll, please. Our first winner is Kelly Headley. Congratulations, Kelly. Let's see, next one, Marcos Bernd, B-E-R-N-D. Congratulations, Marcos. Our third winner is Stan Tracy. Congratulations, Stan. Okay, our fourth winner now is Venkata Aluru. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Congratulations, Venkata. And finally, our fifth and final winner of today's $50 Amazon gift card drawing is Rudy Wilkinson. Congratulations, Rudy. Congratulations to everybody who did win, and we'll be following up with you post-event to get those gift cards out to you. So Jeff and James, thank you so much for giving such a great presentation. I'm sure the audience got a lot out of it. I know I did. So thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. It's great.
I want to remind the audience real quick that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, you will be able to access it on demand. It's also going to be on the DevOps.com website, so you can check it out there. And want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.